Hey everyone, Brian from Madness and Motive. Well, it's time to talk about Wendi Adelson again. There's been a lot more discussion lately about the potential and likelihood of her arrest, and in anticipation of that, what I've created for today's video is a mock probable cause affidavit for Wendi Adelson. This document is going to detail what I feel are the most significant and telling elements that tie her to this case. So we're going to walk through that together and see how close I got to how that might actually look. I've also created a bonus resource, a Crimeline, pun intended, TM, which is visual and fully interactive, and I think is really going to help you see the whole picture and how Wendi fits into that. It's color-coded, there's highlighting, there are multiple filters you can use to change how the Crimeline displays, which is really helpful in seeing things in a different way and drawing out additional insights. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video to check that out. I think these two resources are going to combine really well to give you a strong understanding of the details of the case and how Wendi fits into that bigger picture. I do want to say that these are living documents, the affidavit and the Crimeline. They can and should be updated over time. And I want to encourage you to share your thoughts on what updates should be made in the comments below. Now, that said, I usually don't like to make my intros too long, but this one is worth a pit stop. When it comes to Wendi Adelson, the temperature gets hot. So let me share some instructions on how to suggest updates. Number 1, write it in the comments below. Number 2, share your suggested update or updates. Number 3, cite your sources so I can verify the information. Number 4, be constructive and even polite and friendly to increase the likelihood of your suggestion going through. Thank you. Let's get into the video. Okay, so this is Wendi's theory of offense and mock probable cause affidavit. Number 1, yes, I am saying the T on affidavit. You just can't hear it through the microphone. So save yourself the time on that comment. The reason I read that first is because I want to remind myself to include the disclaimer that this is a mock doc. It's not, from law enforcement or anything like that. And it's not an accusation of anything. This basically just represents my opinions on some of the facts of the case. So it's just my personal belief, and, everyone deserves a fair trial. So let's get that out of the way first. When you open up this document, which will be linked in the description, by the way, you might get this view. And what I want to call your attention to is over on the left side here, just click on this little outline symbol, and the full outline of this entire document will show up. And I've got subheadings galore in here to organize it in a way that hopefully you can, take the information in a reasonable way and have a lot of takeaways from it, a lot of learnings. So yeah, I would actually suggest reviewing the outline first, just to get a feel for everything that's in here. And then when you read through it, I think it'll be much more impactful. Okay, I'll leave that open. This mock affidavit theorizes probable cause to believe that Wendi Adelson had knowledge of the plot to murder Dan Markel. And I focused on knowledge here because I think involvement is a lot harder to prove. And I think knowledge is, maybe an easier target for us to hit. So that's where this document focuses in on. I'm hoping that you have a foundational knowledge of some of the facts of this case. If you don't know the details of the crime, if you don't know what the bump is, things like that, I would look that stuff up first, okay? Because I'm going to, be more focusing on Wendi here. And I'm not going to go over every single detail of the case because it would just take too long. But basically, I start off with the crime itself on July 18th. I also open up with a summary, and I pasted this exact same thing at the bottom of the document as a recap. And the reason I bookended the document like that is because I like to prepare readers for the information they're going to take in, especially if it's a lot of information. And then after they've taken it in, I like to recap to, make sure the most important points hit home. I'm not going to cover this in the video, but again, I encourage you to open up this document and read it for yourself. We will talk about the recap, though, after we go through everything. So let's talk about the lead up. So number one, we have the divorce, the split between Wendi and Dan. On September 5th, 2012, Wendi Adelson files for divorce from Dan Markel. All right, just to give you an idea of where we are in the timeline. While Markel was away, Wendi, with the help of her family, moved out of the house they lived in together, and she took furniture and other items of significance, the children, Ben and Lincoln, and left divorce papers on the bed. After this point, the intense legal maneuvering between the two began. And I guess I'll just pause right there. So the reason I put this in is to show the split, to mark it in time, as, you know, this is basically where the battle lines were drawn, unfortunately, but also to show that, you know, her moving out in what Dan called the Pearl Harbor attack on him involved her family, and it involved planning and coordination and execution, and they worked together as a unit. That's why I put this in, because I really wanted to show that. You know, she has co-conspirators in her family, and there's a lot of evidence that shows that she could have had knowledge and she could have had involvement in this whole thing. And this is sort of the first brick that I'm laying in that whole story. Then let's move down to the relocation piece. Basically, on June 20th, a Leon County Circuit judge definitively rejected Wendi's request to relocate the children down to South Florida after the divorce. So Wendi and the kids are living up in Tallahassee because that's where Dan Markel is. You know, just because they're split, they have to work together and co-parent in a lot of different ways. But Wendi, Charlie, Harvey, and Donna all desperately wanted Wendi and those kids down in South Florida, but a judge rejected it. So this is the first part of building motive. You see right here a comment following the court's decision. This is where Donna sends that email where she talks about offering Dan $1 million if he will allow this relocation to happen. This was a plot that involved pretty much everyone. We don't have Wendi's sign off on this, and actually we can sort of confirm that she didn't go with it. But Harvey and Donna are in it for 1/3 of $1 million. Charlie appears to be clearly in it for his third, and Donna suggested that Wendi would be in it for 1/3. But you can see that things are getting more desperate, and Donna's got a series of emails that are completely unhinged, that show the lengths that this family was willing to go to and the desperation that was festering. Continuing to build motive, I included a section on the financial disclosure. So Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2014, the year of the murder. Remember, that happened in July, so we're getting close. Dan Markel files a motion to enforce financial provisions of the couple's marital settlement agreement. That took about 10 takes to say, by the way. Markel accused Adelson of submitting an inaccurate and deceptive financial disclosure statement, underreporting her assets by over $240,000. Okay, he goes on to allege some other things as well. If true, and or if Markel won the motion, the impact on Wendi Adelson's life and career would have been significant. It's my belief that the motive here was multifaceted. There were personal and emotional elements to it, but also this financial piece as well. This has been referred to by many as, you know, a legal bomb that Dan was preparing to drop on Wendi. She denied that, but that's why I put this statement that, you know, if true or if Markel won the motion, the impact would have been huge on Wendi. So this one is going in as, you know, building up. It's another brick to that motive. The next section talks about Katie Magbanwa as we're, you know, telling the story of the lead up to this crime. So Catherine Magbanwa was romantically involved with Charlie Adelson, and that's, you know, pretty close to the murder. It's just before it. They started dating. Katie also had interactions with Wendi on at least 2 occasions, and I thought these were important to point out. Once for a couple's dinner, that's on March 11th, 2014. It's at Yardbirds Restaurant. And then again on June 15th, 2014, at the beach where they were photographed together. June 15th is significant to me because June 4th was the first attempt at the murder. Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera drove up from Miami on June 4th, and they tried to track down Dan Markel, and they did for a time, but they actually lost him, and it ended up being a failed attempt. So with Katie McBanois being that connective tissue between the criminal element and the Adelsons, and Wendi interacting with her around the time of the first attempt, just doesn't look good to me. So I included it in the document. And as I guess what could be considered the final, brick to this motive building are the supervised visits. So March 26th, 2014, Dan Markel files a motion to limit or prohibit unsupervised visits between his children and Donna Adelson. This is for Donna bad-mouthing Dan to the kids. And this officially brings in Donna to the legal battle. So now she's part of it as well. On May 15th, a hearing was set. Okay, so keep that time in your mind. This is why a timeline later on in the video is going to be so useful, by the way. But we've got May 15th. Now, just under a month later, just weeks later, June 4th, we have that first but failed attempt to kill Dan Markel. According to Jeffrey Lacasse, Wendi Adelson's boyfriend at the time, Wendi was a nervous wreck that same evening on June 4th. So we've got someone with her that night, who knows, potentially for an alibi. And, he reports that she was behaving distressed and anxious, calling her a nervous wreck. I included a section on plans because I found these to be quite suspicious. The first is on June 4th. So we were just on that day. That's the first but failed murder attempt. And at night, she's with Jeff Lacasse, Wendi is, and she's acting strange. Well, earlier that day, they had a coffee date, and she canceled some plans that were well established with Jeff. They were going to travel to California the week of, Monday, the 14th of July. And remember, July 18th is when the murder happens. So Jeff found this really odd. The plane tickets were already purchased, and they were ready to go in July. But on that June 4th afternoon during the coffee date, Wendi tells Jeff, I have to cancel that trip. I can't go. I have to be in town on the 18th to pick up the kids. When I originally heard of this cancellation, I was pretty certain that, Wendi canceled this to leave herself open on the 18th because she knew, the murder was going to be attempted then. But she canceled it on June 4th while the first attempt was, I guess, in progress. So perhaps that's not the reason she canceled. I'm actually a little unsure of exactly why she canceled this, but we do know that Jeff Lacasse found this extremely strange. It was, very last minute. Is it possible that they chose the 18th as a backup date in case the first attempt failed? I'm not really sure at this point after seeing this information. So I'd love for you to share in the comments if you have any theories. Also under plans, I've got on July 6th, Wendi was near or at her parents' residence. At 10:47 in the morning, she texts Dan Markel and asks if he would be in Tallahassee July 14 to 18. 18 is the murder date. And this text happens on July 6th. So we're a month out from that first failed attempt. This is going to be one of those things that on its own, it seems pretty innocuous, but when you put everything together and you look at the full picture, all the coincidences, all the odd events, this is one of those things that does, you kind of mark it down as suspicious. Then we move to the day of the murder. Here's where your foundational knowledge, will be hopefully pretty strong, because I don't want to go over all the details here. But what I do want to talk about, if I scroll down a bit, is the phone activity that day. First, let's start off with Wendi's mother, Donna, making the television repair appointment for her. So Donna set this appointment on July 11th for July 18th. Okay. So I want to be really clear about that. There's a lot of information about this television that is really strange. They set up a TV repair appointment for a TV that, according to Jeff Lacasse, was something you would see in a college dorm room. So it wasn't some big, expensive, fancy TV. Wendi said it got broken by one of the kids, throwing a remote at it, but the kids were 3 and 4 at the time. And I believe she was pointing out that the smaller one had thrown the remote. Jeff Lacasse also found this really strange because he was really involved with the kids and had played catch with them before and said that they were too weak to cause the kind of damage that was done to this TV. It's also important to know that TV was used as some of the code speak between co-conspirators like Donna and Charlie. They used TV as something they could keep their communications about the crime hidden. So there's just a strange cloud over this whole TV thing, and I just wanted to quickly go over that first. But let's look at the call logs, and before we do, I want to zoom out and just look at this and point out that these are communications between the actual killers and co-conspirators, and Wendi Adelson is right there in the mix. All right. And that's something that jumps out to me. You have to believe that, Charlie, while he's talking to Katie McBanois, she's talking to the killers who are tracking Dan Markel, and they're trying to pull off this hit. You have to believe that Charlie just, completely switches gears and has innocuous conversations with Wendi. Same thing with Wendi and Donna. Their conversations are totally innocent, and they're just talking about, everyday stuff. And then Donna hangs up the phone and, talks to Charlie, and they're very likely talking about the hit. Just really hard for me to believe, but let's go over some of these details. 8:09 in the morning, Donna contacts Wendi for a really short time. 8:20, this is when Wendi sends that text to Charlie that she ends up deleting, and it says, "This is so sweet." 8:50, Dan drops the kids off at preschool, and then shortly after, he contacts Wendi and leaves a voicemail. And I left the transcript of his message right here. I'm going to be at the gym probably between 9:15 and 10:30. Really sad to read that, knowing that, the killers were able to find him at the gym, wait for him to finish his class, and then leave to go home. And, they tracked him to his home, and they were able to pull off the hit, sadly. So they had that first attempt where they lost him and they failed and had to go back to Miami. But this time, not the case. And yeah, it's just haunting that he shared this information with Wendi and they were able to find him. Not long after that, Charlie reaches out to Wendi, maybe missed her, but she calls him back at 9:19. And they have this infamous 18-minute conversation, which Wendi claims was about this broken TV and whether it would be, a better option to get it fixed or just replace it. A lot of people find this really suspicious. Again, because of the information I shared, there is a suspicious cloud over this whole TV thing anyways. And then we've got an 18-minute conversation about, whether you should replace it or get it fixed. It just seems really bizarre. Okay, I'm going to scroll down a little more. And I just sort of wrapped up this whole thing and just said, in the hours leading up to the murder, there's a flurry of communication between known and indicted co-conspirators, Charlie Adelson, Donna Adelson, and Katie McBanois. Communications between Wendi Adelson and her brother and mother are tightly interwoven. So that's the thing I wanted to really emphasize there. I'm going to stop on this paragraph really quick because this is an interesting one that we should talk about in more detail. So on the morning of July 18th, Sigfredo Garcia's phone goes off. Okay, and that's, again, to hide their location while they're going to commit the crime. And it comes back on at around 12:30. And at that time, Sigfredo calls Katie. And this is where he says, it's done. And Katie responds, "I know," according to Luis Rivera. And I think this is really significant because Katie knows at 12:30 in the afternoon. And let's go over Wendi's activity. Okay, in this section, drive to the crime scene. So just keep that 12:30 in the afternoon in your mind. So according to Wendi herself, at around 12 p.m., Wendi Adelson left her residence to purchase alcohol and then meet friends for lunch. Despite a shorter route being available, she drove south on Centerville Road, which approximately doubled the length of the trip. So suspicious right there. She stated in her first and only police interview that she turned on to Trescott and drove until she reached police tape. An officer on scene sees the same SUV as the one Wendi drove, drive up to the tape, and abruptly turn around and leave. It was a busy, active crime scene by the time she would have driven within full view of the activity. So this is really important because if you look, if she leaves at 12, she's at Trescott within, maybe 10 minutes, and she's seeing this scene. So let's just say 12:15. And then she turns around, she does that K turn that she testified to, and drives off. Garcia speaks to Katie at 12:30, and Katie already knows what's going on. So for me, the time lines up actually perfectly to where Wendi could have witnessed the busy crime scene. She could have called probably Charlie. They did the train car thing. If you've watched the trial, Sarah Dugan and Georgia Kappelman talk about this train car style of communication. So Wendi could have, contacted Charlie. Charlie relays to Katie that the crime has been committed, and that's why she already knows by the time Segredo calls her. I also put one last gut punch in here. Wendi Adelson did not speak to an officer on scene, inquire about her children, call their school, or contact Dan Markel to find out what was happening or ensure the children were safe. At lunch, law enforcement tracks Wendi down and they take her in for her first and only police interview. I know there's a lot of details around this, and this video isn't going to be an analysis of that interview, although I do want to do one later. But I just wanted to put in some key points that during this interview, Wendi indicates that her parents were very angry at Dan. I mean, she's really just supporting the motive here, suggesting that someone could have arranged the murder, thinking it would help her. And here's where she mentions her own brother and his joke about, hiring a hitman and how it would be cheaper to buy her a television. Another really odd and suspicious thing that she says during this interview is she felt her former in-laws would suspect her of murdering their son since she was denied the ability to move by the court. Very odd, uncomfortable thing to say. And it really supports what we were talking about before. That's the, relocation piece to the motive, which I feel it's a piece. I know there's a lot of focus on it as maybe being the main thing, but I actually think it's just like one part of it. The next section covers the money. So with the hit completed, we've got some money to exchange. This section doesn't really involve Wendi, but it's an important piece to telling the whole story. So essentially, on the night of the murder, so we're July 18th, 7:13 p.m., Donna Adelson texts her son Charlie, "Call us ASAP." At around 9 p.m., Donna texts him again and says, "Outside your house." And I believe Charlie responds that he would be there in about 10 minutes. This is believed to be the time that essentially a money bag was dropped off at Charlie's house by his parents. They were there for about an hour and a half, at which time they left for Tallahassee to meet up with Wendi. That puts us at about 10:30 p.m., and I'm saying that around 11 p.m., Katie McBanois arrives at Charlie's residence. According to her, Charlie is really edgy and said that his parents were just there to drop the money off. She takes a Xanax. Everybody in this story is popping pills, and she falls asleep. On the morning of July 19th, 9:44 in the morning, Katie leaves Charlie's house, and she was informed by him that the money, which was stapled and actually washed, was in the trunk of her car. So according to her, the money drop is complete and the lump sum is, ready to be dispersed as the first payment for this hit. This wasn't all the money that was dispersed. I do have a section on continued payments. If you'd like to read through that. What I'd like to do is jump to after the murder. So we've got a memorial service for Dan on the 20th of July. And we've got Wendi and her parents in attendance. And at that memorial service, Wendy's parents were approached for a police interview. Okay, but this document's focusing on Wendi. So we're going to look at the next day. So that would be the 21st. A Tallahassee police investigator reached out to Wendi on her cell phone. She abruptly ends the call, citing a poor connection. And then after that point, the investigators can never get in touch with her again. It's always her lawyer. It's her right to do that, but it's quite uncooperative. And then I really wanted to point out that Harvey and Donna Adelson departed Tallahassee with Wendi and the grandchildren the day following the memorial service. So this is the day of that, dropped call. They all failed to meet with investigators for those requested interviews. And since their departure, the Adelson family never reached out to TPD about the status of the investigation. I've also got in this section titled After the Murder some takeaways from the police interview with Tamara Demko, who is a mutual friend of Dan Markel and Wendi Adelson. She reported unusual behavior from Wendi and her father, Harvey, during a visit to Wendi's house the day after the murder. In addition, she shared that Wendi's departure during the divorce was well-planned, deftly executed, and involved the entire family. So 2 compelling takeaways here. The unusual behavior, something felt off to her about Wendi. I've done a full video on this, by the way. If you'd like to know more detail on that, it'll be linked in the description. And then Tamara is supporting what we established at the beginning of this document, that the divorce departure was one of these well-planned, deftly executed operations involving the entire family. Then we've got the name change from Wendi. So by the start of the school year in 2014, around the end of August or beginning of September, Wendi had actively started using Adelson as the boy's last name, replacing Markel. Later in the timeline, July 6, 2015, the boy's last name was officially changed. She said she did this to protect the boys. She was terrified, and the Markel name was all over the media, and the Adelson name really was not at the time. I did a video on this showing that the Adelson name was there from the beginning, and it was all over major publications, both national and international. Once again, I'll link that video in the description. And then we fast forward about 2 years. We're in 2016, and law enforcement pulls off this expert move called the bump. If you're not familiar with the bump, once again, I'll link it in the description. It's important to get the background on this and understand the details of it. But it was really effective in breaking things up and, making the co-conspirators scatter like cockroaches and panic, say stupid things on wiretaps. So definitely check that out. But at this period in time, you're going to see Wendi's indicators kind of drop off a little bit, or maybe even a lot. She doesn't appear as much in this section of the document or on a timeline, but there's a reason for that. I think she really just allowed other people to get much closer to the sun than she would ever get. So that's why we're seeing this. But we've got the bump here, April 2016. I've got some really interesting information here. And, if you're interested in the Harvey stuff, I think you're going to learn a lot by going through this. As we go a little deeper into the wiretaps, I wanted to point out that Charlie asked about the contents of a letter that Donna received. This was a follow-up to the bump. Law enforcement sent a letter. And Donna indicates that a TV, which represented the amount that law enforcement requested, was around $5,000. I've also got a clip here that says the reference to the TV, an example of the co-conspirators speaking in code, is very significant because on the morning of the murder, Wendi had a TV repair appointment scheduled which almost precisely overlapped with the crime. So you can see I'm trying to put the pieces together of her family, the co-conspirators using this code speak, and this TV appointment that was so odd, this hyper focus on a TV that wasn't even a high quality item. All of this seemed incredibly odd to Jeffrey Lacasse, and here we have Wendi not asking any questions about it, acting as if everything is perfectly normal. Next, we have the Dolce Vita meeting. This is between Charlie and Katie McBanois. They're discussing the bump and the requests for money. And, Charlie, again, is really starting to spout his theories on what he thinks this whole thing is and how they might handle it. Then we have the Matsuri meeting, April 21, 2016. Just a couple of days, few days after the bump, Charlie meets with Harvey to discuss things. And once again, I showed in another video how I think Harvey showed full awareness here, just kind of reinforcing that all the players in this family have knowledge and something to do with what's going on. And this tracks with intuition from witnesses like Jeff Lacasse and Tamara Demko. Here's some more detail on follow-ups to the bump. So we've got the letter here. Not much about Wendi, so that's why I'm kind of skipping over these sections a little bit more. And then we've got the text. Okay, so yet another follow-up. We're in May now of 2016, and law enforcement is just still hammering away at this group of co-conspirators and listening in to their conversations. And then we get to the section I'm calling Arrests and Revelations. So obviously, as you see, there are arrests happening now. We're in May of 2016. Sigfredo Garcia is arrested. June 28th, 2016, Luis Rivera is apprehended. Sorry, I should be consistent there and call him Luis Rivera. And Luis is actually a decent witness. Yes, he's a former Latin King gang member, and he was directly involved in a brutal murder. However, much of his statements during interviews and his testimony has been corroborated, and I think a lot of people find him totally believable. That's important as we talk about this next piece in the affidavit. So Garcia, Sigfredo Garcia, the actual gunman, elaborated on the way to the first murder attempt that a woman with 2 children wanted her ex-husband killed to gain full custody of the children in Miami. So the way Luis Rivera reports Sigfredo's statement here is really interesting to me and does not look good for Wendi. So I thought that was worth mentioning in the document and something I wanted to highlight. Now, after that first failed attempt, we move to July 17th, and they are driving around Dan's neighborhood, kind of scoping things out. Rivera said Sigfredo spotted Wendi Adelson, clearly recognizing her. She looked back at them in the car, and this gave Rivera a very uncomfortable feeling. You know, you don't want to be looked at when you're doing reconnaissance and you're preparing to commit a crime. You're more in the mindset of, concealment and hiding. So I think in this moment he felt revealed and exposed, and he wanted some reassurance. So Sigfredo calls Katie, and on that call, Katie confirms that Wendi is nothing to worry about. She was just making sure Dan Markel was leaving the next day. And another thing that Katie really emphasized on this call is, you guys got to do this hit tomorrow. It has to happen tomorrow because he's leaving town. In my opinion, I think if a jury finds Luis Rivera believable, this is really powerful information because it gets us closer to establishing that Wendi Adelson was feeding co-conspirators with critical information they needed to make this second attempt at the hit successful. I've got some more detail in here, about some of the additional information. Then we've got witnesses, Jeffrey Lacasse. So I've got that Wendi confided in him about Charlie's serious inquiries into hiring a hitman in the summer of 2013, from what I could gather. I've also got a list here where Jeff shared a number of highly relevant and suspicious points regarding their relationship. So June 4th, that's the first attempt at the hit. Wendi cancels her travel plans with Jeff that she agreed to for the week of July 14th, the same week as the murder. Tickets were already purchased, and Jeff said Wendi insisted that she had to be home on July 18th. On July 13th, according to Jeff, Wendi told him Charlie had looked into hiring a hitman the previous summer in 2013. On July 14th, after an uncomfortable yoga date, Jeff felt the relationship was over. He further confirmed through an email Wendi sent asking Jeff not to contact her and that she needed, quote, a week to think. During their awkward split after that date, Jeff had walked away and was stopped by Wendi. According to Jeff, she asked him a series of questions about his plans on July 18th. And we know that Jeffrey Lacasse had originally planned on going on a road trip, leaving Tallahassee on Friday, July 18th, the day of the murder, at around 11 a.m., which would have put him very close to the crime scene right around the time it happened. And there's a strong theory out there that Jeffrey Lacasse may have been set up to look like he committed this crime. He even said himself, if I had left on that Friday, life could have become very complicated. I've got some information from June Umchinda, an ex-girlfriend of Charlie's, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, who is an ex-friend, just to keep the thread about Charlie going because, of course, it's Wendy's brother, and he's a big part of what connects her to this whole thing. We've got trials and convictions. So Sigfredo, Luis, Katie, Charlie, all paying dearly for their part in this crime. And then I've got the planned escape part to establish consciousness of guilt for Donna Adelson and potentially Harvey Adelson as well. And basically the last official section of this affidavit is the testimony. And I really wanted to point out some things here that are deeply troubling. Wendi has given testimony in 3 trials, all by subpoena, by the way. In these testimonies, she has been shown to make significant denials. Number 1, she has been inconsistent about turning onto Trescott Drive. So in her police interview, she confirms that she did turn onto Trescott Drive. She drove all the way down until she hit the police tape. Okay. In Katie's first trial, she denied turning onto Trescott Drive, said she never did. She never got off Centerville. She tried to turn onto Trescott, but was unable to because it was blocked by tape. And we know this isn't where the tape was. It was way down on Trescott. In Katie's retrial, she says that she did turn onto Trescott. And then in Charlie's trial, she said she never got onto Trescott. She's back to her, denial. I tried to turn onto it. There was police tape, but I couldn't get down Trescott, so I just kept going down Centerville. Deeply troubling. Also, something that shows up in her testimony is her denying that her parents were extremely angry with Markel. This just doesn't even make sense. In my opinion, it even conflicts with her own police interview, but there are just mountains and mountains of evidence to show that this wasn't true and that she was perfectly aware that, this is just not true. Finally, she denied that she was as venomous as Markel in the legal battles between the two. And again, this is another case where this is just provably false. They were both maneuvering. They were both playing chess at their full capacity as, legal minds. And she was right there in the ring with him. So this just looks like an attempt, as do her other denials, to distance herself from things that might look incriminating or tie her to a motive, that sort of thing. Now, here's my recap of probable cause. So let's kind of talk about everything that we've gone over. Number 1, the Adelson family, which includes known co-conspirators in the crime, has shown that they discuss, plan, and execute together, particularly in the case of Wendy's divorce, that Pearl Harbor exit from Dan Markel. There's a well-established, multifaceted motive that includes personal, emotional, and financial elements. So there's a lot of relief and benefit coming Wendy's way if an event like this happens. Wendi is part of a series of calls between co-conspirators on the morning of the murder, less than 2 hours before it happens. And she's tightly interwoven within that flurry of calls. Wendi is believed to have driven by the scene soon after the crime occurred, and her statements on this have been inconsistent. At 12:30 p.m. on the day of the crime, Sigfredo Garcia told Katie McBanois the hit was done, and she responded, "I know," according to testimony from Luis Rivera. Wendi Adelson's departure toward Trescott at around noon would have placed her there in time to report the crime scene. Soon after the murder, Wendi failed to respond to investigators about a second interview. She moved to South Florida and never contacted TPD about an update on the case. And finally, there are a large number of coincidental and/or odd events involving Wendi and this crime. So these are kind of my main callouts that I chose to include in this document. I know there's a lot of other stuff like the book and the owl and things like that, but just in my opinion, I don't find those as strong as this stuff. I still think they're compelling, but I wanted to try to include things that were going to, give us a strong reason to hypothetically, make an arrest here. So that's what I've got in this document. Let's now hop over to the interactive timeline I created for Wendi. Before we get to anything, I want you to watch me scroll down here. And in the bottom right, I'm going to click on full screen option. Okay. This is going to help this become much easier on the eyes and get rid of all that other distracting stuff. It'll also make it bigger so you can see it better. All right. So let's go over some basics of this Crimeline. Number one, you can scroll. Okay. So I don't want you to think that what we're looking at is all I included on this. Definitely not. This includes more than 75 data points. So I think it's like more than twice the size of Harvey's timeline that I created for the other video. If you hover over an item, it's going to highlight the month and day, and it's going to just focus on that one item. A tooltip comes up that shows you date, time if I could find it or if it applies, who's involved, and a note if it applies. So you can see for this example, Wendi files for divorce, and then I included a note, well planned, deftly executed from Tamara Demko. What you're going to see down below here on this final row is each year, okay? And each of these timeline events lines up with a year. So you can see 2014 right here. You can see all the events that line up for 2014. Over on the right side, we've got a number of filters that you can choose. So if you just want to see events for, let's say, 2014, just click all to unselect everything and then click 2014, and you're only going to see events that happened in that year. I've also kind of upgraded this from Harvey's, and I've got a group option. So you can see events in the lead up to the crime only. Okay. And then we could look at, things post-murder. So this is like in the immediate aftermath. And, I've even got a section called accountability. So if I select that, we're going to have arrests and testimony, where they stuck Wendi on the stand and made her answer to some things. And then finally, conditions. So if you want to just see where the crime happened, you can just click that. And that's exactly where it is. You can also, if you want to just see what Wendi's involved in, you can just click on Wendi involved. Okay, and it'll take every other mark on the timeline away. So you can just see where Wendi fits into this whole thing. For instance, here's that big gap around the bump with the letter and the text where, she doesn't really show up all that much. And this is kind of an interesting way to highlight that. Okay, so there you have it. That's how you use this resource. Let's kind of walk through this timeline and look at how everything fits. So we're going to start in 2012 where Wendi files for divorce. We went over this one. This is where she does the Pearl Harbor exit, and I've got that as well. We move into May of 2013, and we've got the first of Donna's wackadoo emails. We've got Wendi's attorney filing the request for relocation. And then we've got the rejection of that relocation happening toward the end of June. Immediately following that, we've got two emails from Donna, number 2 and 3 here, on the 25th and the 27th of 2013. At the end of July, we've got the divorce being finalized. And here in August, we've got Charlie looking into hiring a hitman. So a couple of things about this data point. Number one, this is according to Jeff Lacasse. And number two, I picked August 1st because the way Jeff said this is, Wendi told me, Charlie was seriously looking into hiring a hitman in the summer of 2013. So I didn't get like an exact month or day here. So I just picked a summer month and I just picked the 1st. Okay. If you can do better than that, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to get something more accurate here. Then we finish out 2013 in October. And I just included a text from Donna to Charlie saying, it was a horrible day for your sister. And apparently it was a horrible day for Harvey as well, because the text said, Dad had to walk outside to lower his blood pressure. And I just included something like this because I had the data point, and also this just piles onto motive. Everybody in the family was under incredible stress and pressure from this. It's impacting, Harvey's health. And that could be another thing that kind of sprung Charlie into action, sprung Donna into action. And Wendi is likely an emotional wreck at this point. Then we move into 2014. There's a lot happening here. So we've got the Valentine's Day financial motion, which to me is really powerful and a significant portion of the overall motive here. This was going to be quite destructive to Wendi. Just 4 days later, we've got another wackadoo email from Donna, so she's still at it. In March, we have Donna's text to Charlie, and this is that text where she says, I can get away for a moment. She's going to go into the bathroom and they're going to do a quick call, and she tells Charlie to erase this text. So I wanted to put that in there so you could see where it fits into this whole thing. Remember, this is when the financial motion had dropped. So you're really going to see things heating up now. March 11th, we've got that Yardbirds dinner. So this is one of the interactions between Wendi and Katie. Later that same month, Dan files what I'm calling the Sunshine's motion for supervised visits. So this is where Dan gets wind that Donna's been bad-mouthing him, and he responds by, putting forward that motion for supervised visits. This adds some fuel to the fire, gets Donna involved, and was, probably something that sent her into disarray. We take a few steps forward into May, and a hearing is set for this motion to prohibit unsupervised visits. So this is going forward. They've lost to Dan in the past. We've got the financial thing coming. There's a lot of pressure building here. And just as you would imagine, in June, so not long after this hearing is set, we've got the first attempt at the murder. Okay, now let's look at that day for a second. So Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia are in town on June 4th, and they're trying to track Dan. Wendi meets with Jeff for coffee, and she ends up canceling travel plans with him. Later that night, Wendi and Jeff get together again, and Jeff reports that Wendi is a nervous wreck. And obviously, this is something that could tie back to the fact that, there were killers in town, and they're going to try to murder Dan. This whole thing could go wrong. They could all go to prison for it. There must have been thoughts like that rolling through Wendi's head if she was involved. So it wouldn't be surprising that she'd be a nervous wreck here. On June 8th, we've got the text regarding Dad's B-Day present. So in my opinion, this is another example of code, and looking at things on a timeline can really help confirm that here, because before I did this exercise, I wasn't 100% on this one, on the whole Dad's birthday thing. And obviously I'm still not 100%, but I'm a little further toward 100, because we got the first attempt at the murder here and it fails. And then just 4 days later, Donna has an exchange with Charlie, and they're supposedly talking about Dad's B-Day present. And Donna says, I know you'll come through. I think she says something like, I know these things can be difficult, but I know you'll come through. This looks a lot like code speak, and it feels like Charlie is starting to work on, hit version 2.0 here. We move just a week later, and we're at June 15th, and this is where that beach photo is taken with Wendi and Katie and a third woman. This is the second known interaction between Wendi and Katie, and again, disturbing considering the fact that a hit has already been attempted, and here Wendi is, having more interactions with the middle woman of this whole thing. July 1st, we've got Sigfredo Garcia's phone contacting Harvey's. This was, by all accounts, an attempt to contact Charlie and leave Charlie a nasty message. But what it does show is an early connection between, this criminal element, these parties over on this side of the crime, and the Adelson family on the other side. Now that we're in July, I actually did put Harvey's birthday on this timeline because, like I said, there is discussion about his birthday and how it's possible that some of these things were carried out and spoken about as like a gift to Harvey. This is another reason I pointed out that, he was having blood pressure issues over all of this. So here we have his birthday on July 5th. And then on the 6th, Wendi is located near or at her parents' residence, and she texts Dan asking about July 14 to 18. Are you going to be around then? As explained in the document, the affidavit, we have July 11th. This is when Donna sets that TV repair for Wendi. July 13th, Wendi tells Jeff Charlie looked into hiring a hitman in the summer of 2013. So that's how those two data points connect. Then we're at July 14th, so this is going to be a Monday. Jeff and Wendi have this incredibly awkward yoga date. Apparently, before this date, they were communicating and everything was actually going quite well. She seemed excited to spend time with him. And then when they actually go on the date, she just acted bizarre, pretty much the polar opposite, cold and, not responsive to him. So they have this awkward yoga date. They get out into the parking lot. Jeff feels like it's over. So he basically, throws his hands up and goes to walk to his car. Wendi says, oh, by the way, and then starts inquiring about his plans on the 18th. Then the cherry on top, they go home and Jeff gets an email from Wendi. Don't contact me for a week. I need a week to think. It's all very bizarre and really suspicious. July 15th, we've got the Prius rented in Miami, and July 17th, the killers arrive in Tallahassee. That same day, Luis and Sigfredo drive by the house, so they're scoping it out again. During this second attempt, they spot, and Sigfredo recognizes Wendi. Let's see what I have in the tooltip. Yeah, this is where Luis gets uncomfortable with the way Wendy's looking into the car. And so Sigfredo calls Katie and basically asks, like, hey, is she cool? Katie says, yeah, she's cool. And then re-emphasizes that, the murder has to be done on the 18th because he's going to leave town. And this is one of those areas where people wonder, how did Katie get that information? Who's the most likely person that would know that? That brings us to the day of the crime. Okay, so Donna texts Wendi that Best Buy is on their way. That's at 8:11 in the morning. Wendi texts Charlie, this is so sweet. That's at 8:20 in the morning. This is the text that she deletes from her phone. Wendi agreed in court that the window that the Geek Squad was going to show up was anywhere from 8 to 12. And she said that she couldn't remember the exact time the guy got there, but he got there on the early side. So I put that as 9 a.m. I also put a note here that Wendi repeats this hitman joke from Charlie to the Best Buy guy, which again is just so suspicious and odd. It's a strange thing to do, and it's even more strange that her ex-husband was actually killed by a hitman on the day she repeated this. Here we've got that 9:19 call. It's an 18-minute conversation between Wendi and Charlie. And this is pretty soon after Dan had left a voicemail on Wendy's phone telling her exactly when he was going to be at the gym. And we know that that's where the killers found him. Sadly, at around 10:55 in the morning, Dan Markel is killed. And then, according to her own statements, just about an hour later, Wendi leaves her house for the liquor store and lunch. Now, she said herself that she left around noon, which is really important based on what Katie says later on. So around noon, I put it at 12:15. I probably could have put it right at noon since that's basically what Wendi has said in a statement. Wendi leaves for the liquor store and lunch with friends. She takes a route that is twice as long as another one that was available to her. If she left at around 12:15, it probably would have taken 10 minutes or maybe even less to get to Dan's house on Trescott to drive up to that police crime scene. So I've got it at 12:25. It probably could have been 12:20 or even 12:15. And I've put a note here that, she sees all this police activity going on. It's right at Dan's house and, she never inquires. At 12:30, Garcia's phone comes back on. He's talking to Katie and shares, it's done. And Luis Rivera overhears Katie say, I know. And this really lines up time-wise with Wendi leaving, let's say at 12 or 12:15. She takes about 10 minutes to drive down Centerville, turn onto Trescott, up to the crime scene, and then she does this K-turn and drives away. That puts her anywhere from 12:15 to 12:25 to begin this train car communication, call her brother. Her brother could call Katie. And then Sigfredo and Katie are talking, and Sigfredo at 12:30 says it's done, and Katie already knows. According to the information I've found and the timeline I've created here, this scenario is entirely possible. Police then find Wendi at lunch with her friends. They call her in for an interview. It's the first and only one. And in this interview, she does say she drove on Trescott. And that's really important because we know from police that the crime scene tape was very, very close to Dan's house on Trescott. So if she drove up to that tape, she knew something had happened at that house and didn't ask anything, which is highly incriminating in my opinion. I put down that, Wendi doesn't contact Jeff or Tamara on the day of, or, even the next day. And they both found that really, really strange. Then I've got some, money trading going on. So Donna texts Charlie the night of the crime that, we're outside your house. Katie arrives at the residence somewhere around 11 p.m. This is after Donna and Harvey have already left. They're traveling to Tallahassee, and their cell phone information puts them in Orlando at around 1:25 in the morning, where it looks like they stopped to sleep. One thing I wanted to do is just pause on this data point right here really quick and discuss something, or really share something one of my subscribers pointed out, Jennifer McIntyre. Wendi's up in Tallahassee and Dan is killed. And apparently Wendi is innocent and terrified. Now, what do Donna and Harvey do? Well, they wait hours and they meet with Charlie. And then they hang out at Charlie's house for an hour and a half. And then they get in the car and they drive until 1:25 in the morning, and they stop in Orlando and they stay overnight somewhere. And, by all accounts, they sleep. And then they wake up the next morning and finish the trip to Tallahassee. You might say that they were older and of course they were going to make a pit stop in the middle of the night. But what about all the time before? It seems really strange to me that they could even rest. And I was an oops baby, so my parents are older. They put in the work throughout my life, even into my 20s, bailing me out of situations that I got myself into. So in my opinion, this one does track as really odd behavior, at least on their end. Next up, we are on July 19th. We've got Katie leaving Charlie's residence. Charlie lets her know, bag of money is in your car. And then at around 10:30 in the morning, Katie is coordinating the payment with Sigfredo and Luis. We've got Donna and Harvey arriving in Tallahassee. And sometime during this day, Tamara Demko basically can't stand it anymore, the fact that Wendi has not called her. And she just drives over to the house, and Wendi and her parents and at least one other person is there. And that's where Tamara gets just those very, very strange vibes. She's incredibly uncomfortable and suspicious with the whole thing. July 20th is Dan's memorial service. This is where Tallahassee PD approaches Donna and Harvey about an interview. The very next day, they call Wendi about a second interview, and she does the telemarketer move and fakes a bad connection, drops the call. And then Wendi and her parents return to South Florida with the kids on the 22nd. Continuing along our timeline in the summer months, we've got Katie making the $13,000 deposit. We've got the supposed celebration dinner, according to Jeff Lacasse. It was referred to as that, where Wendi vomits. So, we're not sure what Charlie told her or, what she knew before this whole thing. But I did want to put it on the timeline so we could sort of see it play out in front of us. In September, here's where those continued payments are happening. So Katie begins receiving Adelson Institute checks. Wendi begins using the Adelson last name for the kids right around the start of that 2014 school year. And then we've got another one of Harvey's birthdays. I'm going to update this, by the way. I should have put this as 2015 because his birthday happens on July 5th, 2015. And then July 6th is when, the boy's last name is legally changed to Adelson from Markel. So again, just for those interested, for those who are suspicious of certain activities around Harvey's birthday, that's why I wanted to put that. I'll update that error. Sorry about that. And then we have 2016. And, the real focal point of this particular part of the timeline really is the bump. This is the move from law enforcement that really broke that bubble that all these co-conspirators were living in. And you don't see Wendi as much, at least in this chunk. And in my opinion, I think that kind of tells the story of her particular involvement in this whole thing. Wendi has been called non-confrontational in the past. And I think this is another one of her many MOs. I think in a lot of cases when the problems get too big, Wendi doesn't want to confront them. And she either lets them fester until they just go away, or she allows someone to come in and fix it for her. She might motivate them out of frustration, or if they want to come in and feel like the hero, people like that feeling, and she might use that to manipulate them. I hate to say it like this, but for Wendi, Dan Markel was the biggest problem of them all. And having a hit carried out is the most non-confrontational and disgusting evil thing you could possibly do. I think Wendi has a track record of people making decisions for her when it gets really tough, or going as far as to solve problems for her through definitive action when she's overwhelmed. And this is the ultimate example of that. So you don't see her as much in this particular part of the timeline. I did include what could be Wendi's only comment on this case publicly. And this is after Sigfredo was arrested. Wendi came forward and mentioned that this brought closure. I thought this was so strange because to me, the last thing this would have brought is closure. It really would have just brought up more questions than it answered. Who is this person? Why did he do it? Who is he connected with? These are all things I would want to know, and all things that would shatter any sense of something resembling closure. So to me, I think this is really bizarre. And in my opinion, it shows that she wanted it to be closure. She wants the door to shut on this. She doesn't want questions like that answered because she already knows the answers and she knows where that information would lead. In June of that year, 2016, the official connection to the Adelson family is established by law enforcement. And then we've got a couple of arrests. So we've got Luis and Katie arrested. And then in 2019, I have got September 27th, Wendi testifies under subpoena at Katie's first trial. When you see Wendi testifying on this timeline, I do suggest that you hover over it because my notes track what she said about her turn onto Trescott. So let's follow this. Katie's first trial, she denies turning on Trescott. If you recall from her police interview, she said she did turn down Trescott and she pulled right up to the crime scene tape. So we've basically got our first contradiction here. Then we've got Charlie arrested. We're in 2022 now. We've got Katie's retrial. And here's what she said. She said she did turn onto Trescott. Our next data point in 2023 is at Charlie's trial, where George is questioning her on this once again, and we've got a denial. So police interview, I did turn. Katie's first trial, I didn't turn. Katie's retrial, I did turn. Charlie's trial, I didn't turn. It's bad enough that she turned down Trescott, but then to have inconsistent statements like this on such an important piece of evidence, I think looks really, really bad. Then the timeline finishes out. I've got the last data point as Donna being arrested at the airport. I know there have been, calls and additional interviews released from various channels. And like I said, we can add to this. This is a living resource, and I want to update it to make sure it's as thorough as possible. Just follow my guidelines about commenting suggestions that I shared at the beginning of the video. So there you have it, team. A mock probable cause affidavit for Wendi Adelson and a crime line that details most of the significant events of the case and visually shows how Wendi Adelson fits into that picture. How do you think I did on the affidavit? Do you think if one is created, it would look something like that? And how do you feel about the crime line? Is that helpful to you? And did you draw out any new insights by interacting with it? Let me know in the comments. If you stuck around with me for this long, thank you so much. I hope you had a great holiday. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more content like this, I've got a ton of Adelson stuff already posted on the channel and upcoming, so subscribe to the channel. And remember, while it might be difficult, always confront your problems. I'll see you in the next video.